All right, everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Kyle Anslone Show. And today I have Dave DeCamp returning to the show. Dave, how are you doing today?
I'm good, Kyle. Thanks for having me back.
Happy to have you back, Dave. Always really happy to talk to you. You are, of course, my colleague at antiwar.com. You're the news editor there. And so every single day when people go to antiwar.com, hopefully, first thing in the morning, start your day off right, reading the news. Dave has 5, 6, 7, sometimes as many as 10 different stories up there where he's taking what's happening around the world. And, usually you would have to read this at Reuters, the Associated Press, but rather on antiwar.com, Dave just condenses it down. He strips out all the propaganda and gives you exactly what you need to know. And that's what we're going to do on today's show too. Dave, just strip out the propaganda and get to the real truth of several of these issues. And we had Benjamin Netanyahu in the U.S. over the past couple of days, and he met with Donald Trump in the Oval Office. Unfortunately, we didn't have some Zelensky showdown, and it seems like it was another example of Trump just pushing in the chair for Netanyahu and flattering this war criminal who is in our White House. So I want to play some clips from that, including a statement that Netanyahu made after the talks. Let's play the first clip.
We agree that Iran will not have nuclear weapons. This can be done by agreement, but only if this agreement is Libyan style. They go in, blow up the installations, dismantle all of the equipment under American supervision and carried out by America. This would be good. The second possibility, that will not be, is that they drag out the talks. And then there is the military option. Everyone understands this. We spoke about it at length.
So, Dave, I kind of want to start with the first thing he says there, that it's going to be Libya style. Now, you would think for Donald Trump, that would almost be like a trigger, right? Because this is what John Bolton used to destroy the negotiations and the diplomacy with North Korea during his first administration. So why do you think Netanyahu jumped on this rhetoric and said he wants Libyan style denuclearization?
Well, I think with these talks coming up this Saturday between the U.S. and Iran that are happening in Oman, which, according to the reports, Netanyahu just learned about that day that he met with Trump right before the Oval Office press conference. I think Netanyahu wants to sabotage those talks. I think that's pretty obvious. And this is probably what he was telling Trump, that he thinks the only way a deal would work is if they completely dismantle, destroy their nuclear facilities, their civilian nuclear facilities, which is what they are. And I mean, that's just a non-starter for Iran. Iran's not going to go for that. They've been very clear about that. We've seen Mike Waltz say this as well, that he wants the nuclear program to be completely dismantled. And I think this is kind of, that's what Netanyahu's thinking. And this is really the big thing. The big question is, what is the U.S. really going to try to get out of Iran with these talks on Saturday? Because the other thing that you always hear U.S. officials saying, I mean, the whole purpose of Trump pulling out of the JCPOA back in 2018, the idea was we'll pull out, put sanctions on them, and then get a better deal. Well, that's at least what Trump said. I think for a lot of the Iran hawks that actually steered the policy, the idea was war and sanctions. They didn't want to actually reach a deal. But what we see, and again, I think we've seen Mike Waltz say this, other U.S. officials say, that they don't just want to deal, they don't want to just go back to the JCPOA, which put really strict limits on Iran's nuclear enrichment. They want a deal that limits their ballistic missiles. They want a deal that limits their support for allies in the region. And again, these are things that Iran is just not going to go for. I mean, they're not going to limit their missiles, their ballistic missiles, which is really the only thing that gives them any kind of protection against Israel, which is armed with nuclear weapons. So I think that's Netanyahu's point here, is to try to just throw a wrench into the negotiations.
Yeah, one thing that Netanyahu certainly doesn't seem to want in the Middle East is a deal between Iran and the United States. And this was something that was explained back during the signing of the JCPOA, the 2015 Iran nuclear deal, is that once the Iran nuclear program is off the table, then the main reason that Americans think we need to give so much support to Israel is because Iran will wipe it off the map with their nuclear weapons. But if we know Iran doesn't have a nuke, then why do we need to give so much support to Israel? And so I definitely agree with you that Netanyahu doesn't want the U.S. to do this deal with Iran, and this seems to be his attempt to undercut it. Now, the second thing he gets into there is next we could pursue the military option. So, Dave, what do you think are the chances that we're going to end up in a war with Iran? I'm assuming, or I guess Israel, I guess, could end up at war with Iran too, and not the U.S.
I mean, I think the chances are pretty high, considering everything that's been happening in the Middle East, because it looks like Trump is taking the worst advice on the Middle East right now. You see that in his bombing campaign in Yemen. I mean, since March 15th, he's bombed Yemen every day, and they just keep escalating the airstrikes, even though anyone with, just a basic understanding of the situation in Yemen would have been able to tell you that these airstrikes, you can't just bomb the Houthis away. And, again, it's a completely illegal, unauthorized war that he's waging in Yemen. I mean, that's barely under any scrutiny. The scrutiny has been over the signal chat, the fact that a journalist was included in there, the fact that they were talking about bombing Yemen in a signal chat, but none of the criticism is on what they're actually doing in Yemen. And, so if Trump's just willing to do that, willing to just launch dozens of airstrikes in Yemen every single day, I wouldn't put him past him to bomb Iran, because, the same people who are telling him that they could, beat the Houthis just by bombing them in Yemen are probably also telling him that, we just need one big strike on Iran's nuclear facilities, drop our biggest bunker busting bombs on the mountains where they have these nuclear facilities, and that'll be that. They won't really do anything in response. This is what we see. Tom Cotton in a Senate hearing recently was mocking people who are warning about war with Iran. And this is what we see in the response to Tucker Carlson warning against war with Iran, is people saying it wouldn't be war, it would be us bombing them, destroying their nuclear facilities, and then that would be that. But the reality is Iranian missiles could hit U.S. bases in the region and could cause a lot of U.S. casualties. And then what's next? So, the whole thing it comes with a huge risk. But I think the people, Marco Rubio, Mike Waltz, other people within the administration who are probably saying, we could just do it, just one big hit, and that'll be that. And I'm sure that's what Netanyahu's telling him as well when they talk about the military option.
Well, Dave, I would have to imagine that within the Pentagon and the Israeli IDF and Mossad, that there are intelligent people there who sit there and say, like, Iran's nuclear facilities are buried pretty deep underground, and they sure do have a lot of missiles and nuclear facilities. And even if we took out the nuclear facilities, they have enough missiles to hit an awful lot of U.S. military bases in the region and targets all over Israel. And if we don't take out their nuclear facilities, they will certainly build a nuclear bomb if we unsuccessfully attack those. And it just seems so stupid to go to war, even from the perspective of these very evil people. And I'm not trying to say that, Netanyahu's a good guy and would choose not to go to war with Iran. I think if he thought he needed to go to war with Iran to expel all the Palestinians from Gaza, he would bait the Americans into going to war with Iran for him. But if they don't have to do that, do you really think that they're going? I mean, this is absolute lunacy. But as you mentioned, there is a real immaturity and stupidity that certainly exists in the leadership of the Trump administration today.
Yeah, I mean, I think, Iran, when it comes to what Israel's doing in Gaza and the West Bank, I mean, Israel has really effectively neutered Hezbollah, which nobody really expected that to happen the way it did. But, I think one reason why Netanyahu might want war with Iran, or a U.S. war with Iran, really is that it would just, if there's a full-blown war like that in the region, all the attention would be off Gaza and the West Bank, and Israel would essentially be able to do what it wants there with a lot less scrutiny. I think that's part of it. I think Netanyahu kind of just sees this, even if maybe he doesn't think strategically right now is the best, it's completely necessary to bait the U.S. into a war with Iran. I think they do see Trump as like the last chance of getting their war with Iran. I think that's probably a big factor in what the Israelis are thinking. Is like, all right, realistically thinking about this, the appetite for Middle East wars, in the U.S. is very low, and there's probably not going to be another president who's going to back us as strongly as Trump. Which he's shown, because he's bombing Yemen for Israel. I mean, that's very clear. They started bombing Yemen after the Houthis said that they were going, basically threaten Israeli shipping again in response to the Israeli ceasefire violations in Gaza. So, I mean, he's showing them that he's willing to go to war for them. So I think that's a big factor here. Is they see this as the opportunity. Well, this is it. It's right in our lap.
Yeah. And I talked to Dan McAdams about this on the show last week, and he explained, and I think it's a really good point, is that there at one point in time, that would probably be a very good argument that would be made in the White House and being made in Tel Aviv. But at this point in time, if you look at the makeup of the Israeli and the American government, the absolute lunatics populate that administration from top to bottom. Now, I want to move on, Dave, and get into the press conference. And Trump and Netanyahu, most of the press conference, it's so amazing, right? Where we have an accused war criminal in front of the American media in the Oval Office. And Dave, I don't think one question was about Netanyahu's status as a war criminal. And almost none of the questions were actually about the situation in Gaza. It was mostly about tariffs. But I did pick out some of the more interesting and relevant comments they made to the situation in Gaza and the Middle East to play for you. So let's play our next clip.
When they have good living, real living, where Hamas and all of the problems they have, the level of death on the Gaza Strip is just incredible. And I've said it. I don't understand why Israel ever gave it up. Israel owned it. It wasn't this man, so I can say it. He wouldn't have given it up. I know him very well. There's no way. They took oceanfront property and they gave it to people for peace. How did that work out? Not good.
So before Dave responds to this clip, everybody head out and share the show. We have a few hundred of you listening right now on X. If you want to leave us a comment or subscribe to the show so you don't miss a future episode, head on over to the YouTube channel, and we'd be happy to maybe respond to some questions that you have. So Dave, in that comment there, do you think really how Trump just sees Gaza as valuable real estate, as oceanfront property, and really doesn't understand the cultural significance of this region to the Palestinians?
Yeah. I mean, the way you framed it there, like it was Israel's to give away, like Israel owned it and then they gave it away, which just is not the case. And, I think it goes to show when it comes to the Middle East, when it comes to Israel and Palestine, the people around him that he listens to are just the hardcore Zionists. And that's really that. He doesn't understand any, what the real situation is. And I mean, that he shows that by just always saying, oh yeah, the Palestinians can just go, they got to go. They could, it'll be great for them. Like they want to give up their land. Like they're eager to give up their land. And there was another question he was asked during that in the Oval Office, like, do you think it's justified to cut off all aid to Gaza or something? And his response was, well, what I think of Gaza, I think it's a really valuable piece of real estate. So I guess that is just how he views it. He sees that it's on the beach, and that's just where his mind goes. And that's, we've seen Jared Kushner say similar things, and he's one of the people that Trump apparently listens to when it comes to this issue.
Yeah. That was kind of my observation from the beginning. As stupid as it sounded when Trump declared that the U.S. was going to support an ethnic cleansing of over 2 million people, I mean, this is going to go down as one of the worst, if not the worst crime of the century here, Dave, what we're looking at. And Trump is just backing it. It's, again, in some respects baffling, but in another way, it's kind of predictable of who Trump is and how he thinks. And so in some ways, I guess it's not surprising at all. Now, I do have another clip from that press conference to play. Let's go to the next clip.
Well, you know how I feel about the Gaza Strip. I think it's an incredible piece of important real estate, and I think it's something that we would be involved in, but having a peace force like the United States there controlling and owning the Gaza Strip would be a good thing. Because right now, all it is for years and years, all I hear about is killing and Hamas and problems. And if you take the people, the Palestinians, and move them around to different countries, and you have plenty of countries that will do that, and you really have a freedom zone. You call it the freedom zone, a free zone, a zone where people aren't going to be killed every day. That's a hell of a place.
So, Dave, this would almost be comical, him talking about the freedom zone. If he was, he's talking about the people won't be killed every day. Well, the reason they're being killed is the man sitting right next to him. And I guess my first question for you here is, what do you think of this idea that the Israelis and apparently the Americans have of we're going to find some third country to take in the Palestinians? Do you think this is feasible, practical, something actually being discussed and worked on, or just, some kind of smoke screen being thrown up?
Yeah, I mean, we've seen all these reports that they're asking. I mean, it's kind of amazing. According to the reports, they're asking Sudan and Somalia, these two totally war-torn nations, to take in the Palestinians. And there's been some other countries suggested. I think maybe Indonesia, I want to say. And both of them, Trump and Netanyahu, said in that press conference that there's countries willing to take them in. But they didn't name any countries, and we don't really know if that's like a feasible thing. But I think this goes to show, I mean, everything Trump is saying, it is absurd. Obviously, him talking about the freedom zone and the U.S. taking control of it. I don't think that that's ever the actual plan here. What I do think is clear that both of them do think displacing, ethnically cleansing the Palestinians is like the only solution. And again, like you said, he's sitting there saying all these people are dying, and he said the same thing about the rubble. The line that he kept repeating before was, it's like a demolition site. Nobody can live there. And the reason why is because of what Israel did, of this bombing campaign that he's supporting now. So yeah, the whole thing is kind of sickening. And how feasible is it for them to actually force these Palestinians out to another country? It's tough to say. I mean, I think if many of the Palestinians, they don't want to leave. They don't want to give up their home. But at the same time, they're living in this horrific, they're living in hell in Gaza right now. So if you're given the opportunity and you have a family to leave, they're going to call it, voluntary migration. But there's nothing voluntary about it when the threat is, you leave or you die. So, I just don't know really how it's going to play out.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with you. And this is one thing I've been trying to bring up throughout the entire Israeli campaign, is when you're conducting atrocities, and we're going to talk about two of them in just a minute here, Dave. From the Israeli perspective, it's not necessarily that they're trying to kill every last Palestinian in Gaza, but to make life so horrific, right? Like if you think that the Israelis are just going to gun down, as snipers are just going to kill your children, as the father of a young little girl now, as much as I might love a certain piece of land and look at it as my home, I don't know if I risk her life to stay. You know what I mean? Like, I'm sure these are calculations going on and thoughts going on in the heads of every single Palestinian, especially now Israel seems completely unrestrained. Let's go to our first full screen here, Dave. This is an article you wrote for antiwar.com this week. Palestinians hold funeral for 14-year-old American citizen killed by Israeli forces in the West Bank. And so I think there's maybe differentiating stories here, Dave, between what the Palestinians say versus what the Israelis say that these young boys were doing. But I guess even from the Israeli side, the story is they were throwing rocks. And so you had a 14-year-old American citizen in the West Bank who was gunned down by Israel. Now, you would think if Trump's American first policy meant anything, we would be disturbed by this, that this would be a major news story, that this would, invoke the Americans at least to like condemn the Israelis in public. But I'm not seeing anything of that, Dave. So what's going on here?
Yeah, no, nothing. This has barely gotten any attention. And so this is an interesting village in the West Bank. I'm blanking on the name right now, unfortunately, but they call it Little America. There's a few thousand Palestinians who live there, and about 80 to 85%, according to the mayor, have U.S. citizenship. And a lot of Palestinian Americans spend their summers there. But that's become less so since October 7th, since all the tensions have risen in the West Bank. And there's been a lot of settler violence and everything. But this is a kid who was born in New Jersey, grew up there, moved to the West Bank when he was, I'm not sure exactly what age, but when he was still a child. I mean, he was a child when he was killed. And the Palestinians say that him and his two friends were picking almonds somewhere when they were shot by the IDF. There was another boy, 15-year-old, who was also an American citizen, who was wounded. And then another boy, another 15-year-old, not an American citizen, but he was wounded pretty badly as well. And like you said, the IDF story is that they were throwing rocks. I mean, if that's the case, the Palestinian American Community Center, which I believe is based in New Jersey, one of his uncles is on the board. They said he was shot 11 times. So, I mean, that's just not acceptable in any situation here. So it's, something, again, that any other foreign military did this, we'd be hearing a lot about it. Trump would have brought it up with their leader when he came to visit, but didn't even come up, and none of the reporters in the Oval Office thought to ask about it. I asked the State Department for a statement. They basically told me that they acknowledged the IDF statement on it and, say condolences to their family. They didn't acknowledge the Palestinian side of the story. And they didn't say that the U.S. is going to investigate, basically saying, yeah, Israel will investigate itself, as is always the case here. And this happens pretty frequently. I mean, last year was Isanor Agi, an American who was killed. She lives in the U.S. and she went over there and was involved in protests against Israeli settlements. She was shot in the head by the IDF. And there's just total impunity for Israel. We continue to give them weapons and everything.
Yeah. It's absolutely disgusting and disturbing, Dave. Now, before I get to this next article that you wrote this week for antiwar.com, just going to ask the audience again to share the show. We have several hundred of you watching live, mostly on Adson. We really appreciate if you could give us a repost and a like, help us break through the algorithm. I think this is a really important conversation I'm having here with Dave. And then if you really like the show, head on over to the YouTube channel, subscribe, so you catch future episodes. We're live every Monday and Wednesday at 4:45 Eastern. And you could drop a comment and we could post it on the screen, or if you got any questions, we might be able to take one at the end here. So let's put up this next full screen. Dave, this is another article that you wrote for antiwar.com this week. White House says Hamas entirely responsible for Israeli execution of Palestinian medics. And this is talking about the story of 15 medics who were traveling, I think, in the southern half of the Gaza Strip when they were effectively ambushed by the Israeli military. And then it seems that the Israeli military went down and gunned down the medics after they fled their ambulances. And I mean, there's been some absolute horror stories throughout the Israeli onslaught in Gaza that, I really thought would kind of break through the Western media, this iron grip on pro-Israeli coverage, and was just so disgusting that it would have to flip the coverage, and there had to be a lot of attention paid to it, such as the killing of the 7 World Central Kitchen aid workers that is run by a famous American. But this seems like it should be another example to me, and yet the Trump administration is going to just get away with blaming it all on Hamas. What's going on here, Dave?
Yeah, I mean, this is the line that we've seen from the Trump administration. Essentially, the State Department has said that every single thing that happens in Gaza is the fault of Hamas. Hamas is totally responsible. So Israel has no responsibility when it comes to trying to avoid killing civilians, killing children. And I mean, this is just kind of an absurd level of unconditional support for Israel that we're seeing from the administration. Because what happened, it was pretty clear from the evidence that Israeli troops executed these medics. They were buried in, and tried to cover it up. They were buried in a shallow grave along with their ambulances. Then their bodies were exhumed, and there was no sign that they were armed. Some of them were even bound, had their hands tied behind their back. And the Israeli story was, we fired on suspicious vehicles. They didn't have any rescue lights on or anything. Well, then the video comes out and it shows that the IDF was lying, because their siren, their lights were on. They were very clearly ambulances. You see the people get out of the vehicles and they're, wearing uniforms. And then the gunshots start and they get gunned down and killed. And, an execution like that, still the line is that Hamas is entirely responsible for this. So yeah, it's really, it's just sickening, because these crimes are all supported, enabled, funded by the U.S. government, and they're just giving them complete freedom to do whatever they want, to really do anything, and that includes mass murder of children and even executing humanitarian workers like this.
Yeah. So, Dave, just about every day, me and you go back and forth with a couple messages talking about what article I'm going to write for the Libertarian Institute for the day. And quite often, we'll share a story or two just about something happening in Gaza. And a lot of what I end up covering is, the journalists being killed and things like. We're over 230 journalists, well over 200 UNRWA or UN workers. You now have these Palestinian medics. Do you see like any, I guess, breaking of the Israeli control over the narrative here that these atrocities are just too much, right? Like any one of imagine if any of this happened in Ukraine, right? If it was Russia that had killed 15 Red Cross medics, or Russia was destroying all the churches across Ukraine, destroying the military cemeteries in Ukraine, all these things that Israel is doing in Gaza. If Russia was doing them in Ukraine, I mean, it would be played nonstop on our television. And I mean, are you seeing any of that for Gaza and for the Palestinians? Because day after day after day, I really do get more worried, Dave, that they're really going to conduct an ethnic cleansing, a genocide here, and not only do it, but completely get away with it. At least, in our modern discourse and discussion, it's not going to be a scandal every single day that Trump and Netanyahu are committing a genocide.
Yeah, I mean, I have seen some things break through. Like there's this Fox News reporter, his name is Trey Yingst, I believe, and he had a report on the video of the medical workers being killed, of the ambulance workers being killed, and saying, the IDF lied, look at this. And some coverage that we've seen from mainstream sources. I mean, there's just no denying the atrocities and the brutality of what's happening in Gaza. Fact is, it just doesn't seem like enough people care, because there is just overwhelming evidence, that they're purposely killing civilians, and there's just no excuse for the numbers and the type of strikes that they commit every single day in Gaza. It's every single day that, especially since they restarted the bombing last month, like it's just particularly heavy children casualties. I mean, I watch the videos from Gaza every day that the news agencies get, and it's just dead children, wounded children every single day. And, bombing tents. So it just, for whatever reason, it's just, it's not a big issue for a lot of people. There's all this other stuff going on, and I bet part of it is kind of the part of Trump's strategy. I think is distraction. Kind of does a lot of absurd things. That the whole tariff thing. I mean, not that the tariff thing's not a big deal, and shouldn't be covered, but I mean, this is just getting such little attention. It feels like, to me at least, and same thing with Yemen. I mean, he's been bombing Yemen every day. It looks like a lot of civilians are being killed there, and just nobody is paying attention to that either. So this stuff just goes on. It seems like people have just learned to live with it.
Yeah, unfortunately, that seems to be the case, Dave. Now, I want to get to one more of your articles that this actually, for all the bad policies that Trump has had, this one might be the actual most dangerous, I think. Report: Trump administration considers drone strikes on Mexican cartels. Dave, please tell me that we're not going to start basically a war on terror in Mexico, on the southern half of our border. I mean, imagine the blowback from this is going to be absolutely horrific.
Yeah, I mean, I hope that they don't start doing this. So this is based on an NBC News report, but we've seen, it's not just reports. We've seen threats, for years now. It's become a popular idea among Republicans to take military action against the cartels. The thing about this report that's concerning, I mean, it would be bad either way, because there's that risk of, trying to bomb fentanyl away is just kind of a ridiculous idea anyway. There's obviously a lot of reasons why that's ridiculous. One of them is that fentanyl is very easy to smuggle because it's so potent. They don't need to smuggle much into the country. There's also still a high demand for the drug. The root causes of why so many Americans are dying from this stuff. You got to address that. You can't just bomb try to bomb it away. But then, like you mentioned, the potential for blowback. Maybe there's a chance the cartels decide to kind of go underground with their operations if this starts happening. But there's also the chance of them, they have pretty advanced military equipment. There's reports that they got some nice stuff from Ukraine. They could potentially launch missiles across the border. They have people in the U.S. Could they conduct attacks inside U.S. cities? I think that's possible. And they're notoriously brutal, so it could just be terror tactics against U.S. cities. I mean, there's just so many different ways that this could go. But another thing this report says is that they would prefer to do this with the cooperation of the Mexican government, but that they are considering unilateral military action. And apparently Pete Hegseth has threatened that the U.S. could do that when he met with Mexican military officials. So that would be a whole nother, could it be war with Mexico? I mean, it's really crazy to think about, but so is thinking about drone striking the cartels.
Yeah, in some respects, Dave, it may be more dangerous to go to war with the cartels than it would be the Mexican army anyways, just based on the tactics they would be willing to use and the amount of military equipment they have is pretty unbelievable. And again, this seems like one of the things, like war with Iran, that we should just be able to dismiss, that there's no way that this could actually happen. That would just, it would be so expensive and so dangerous and so bloody and so ineffective that every official in the White House, every official in the Pentagon is saying, sir, that we can't do this. But when you look at Pete Hegseth and just how cavalier and how immature he was on the Signal group thread, and then you look at somebody like Kristi Noem, who it seems, her job is to get dressed up as much as possible and then go stand around with big guns and in front of criminals and brag about how she's willing to throw anybody in jail. Like, the mindset of these people is really concerns me, that they may really be serious about doing some of these things that otherwise I would just dismiss as a waste of our time to cover, and let's focus on real issues like in Gaza. But I do think we had to talk about this and really be warning that we could talk about a drone war on our southern border. And who knows how long before, again, if the cartels are operating in the United States of America, that those drone strikes start happening, I'm sure first in the rural Southwest, but who knows where else in this country. I mean, again, these people are lunatics and they're talking about waging a really dangerous war. So before we wrap up here, Dave, not only are they talking about waging wars all across the world, they want to give themselves the military budget to do this. This was posted by Pete Hegseth, and it's a video of Donald Trump talking about the size of the Ned's U.S. military budget.
But despite that, we have a tremendous military. That was a very small portion because we rebuilt the military during my first term, and we have great things happening with our military. We also essentially approved a budget, which is in the facility, you'll like to hear this, of $1 trillion, $1 trillion, and nobody's seen anything like it. We have to build our military, and we're very cost conscious, but the military is something that we have to build, and we have to be strong because you got a lot of bad forces out there now. So we're going to be approving a budget, and I'm proud to say, actually, the biggest one we've ever done for the military. We're cutting other things that were under DOGE, but under a lot of other. When you look at a woman getting $2 billion for environmental, and it had nothing to do with environmental, and they had $100 in the bank, and they give her $2 billion. Many of those cases, all that stuff is going to be cut out.
So, Dave, what do you think? Is the American military in such need, in such disrepair, that we need a $1 trillion military budget next year?
I mean, you talk about waste, like the Pentagon is the most notoriously wasteful agency that can never pass any kind of audit or even come close to it. And, we all hear these horror stories about the price gouging by the defense contractors, charging like tens of thousands of dollars for like a special coffee cup that goes in an F-16 or something. I mean, so it's just, I don't know. We heard Trump talk about cutting the military budget in half with Russia and China. And I didn't think, realistically that would happen, but I thought that meant maybe he was thinking about making some cuts to the military, but turns out that's just not the case at all. And it's just a huge number, the first $1 trillion budget. And Pete Hegseth, I forget exactly what he said, but he said in his post on X something like, "Oh, we'll spend the money wisely, don't worry." But he's the one overseeing this completely wasteful bombing campaign in Yemen. Forget the moral reasons why it's bad. There's like they're spending what $1 billion now on this failed bombing campaign that's not achieving its stated goal. And they're just threatening to escalate and not even really thinking twice about it. So yeah, it's not good.
No, and you do worry that they will eventually end up with the mentality of, well, we spent all this money on all this nice new shiny military equipment. Where are we going to use it? We have all these bombs. Why let them go to waste? We need to drop them. That's certainly the thinking of some of the military-industrial complex. So, Dave DeCamp, thank you so much for returning to the show today. For anybody who wants to read your work, they should head on over to antiwar.com. Every day you are just a beast in a machine cranking out news stories. Also, they could watch your show, Anti-War News with Dave DeCamp. It's on YouTube, published. It's on the front page of antiwar.com as well, so you could watch him talk about his articles as you read the news there. And then, of course, at DeCamp Dave on X. And everybody, thank you so much for tuning in. We had a huge live audience today. So if you are listening live, give us a repost, put it out there to a few more people. Additionally, subscribe to the show so you don't miss a future episode. We're live every Monday and Wednesday at 4:45 Eastern Time. Thanks for tuning in.